Good morning and welcome back to building the DJH G5 kit. And what we're going to do today is we're going to finish the chassis. Now, what I've done in the meantime, when I finished the last video, there were a few things to do. And there were a few things that were very awkward to do. Because the instructions, there's no written instructions, you just get the diagram. So I put a couple of comments at the start of the last video just to make sure that you do things in what would be the least awkward order. I think that's the best way that I can put it. So what I've done in the meantime is I've prepared the wheels, so I've painted them black. I use, just for general painting, I just use Halford's rattle cans. So I use red primer because if you don't get complete coverage, at least it looks like rust. So I use the red oxide primer and matte black. And if you can see, this is one of the driving wheels. This is one of the driven wheels. It's got the large offset balance weight. They've been stuck on with super glue, the Loctite 60-second before I painted it. And here's the chassis again. Halford's rattle can, red oxide, and matte black. 2 coats of each, and normally what I do is I have these green boxes and one fits on top, put elastic bands around them, and they go in the airing cupboard for 24 hours to make sure that the glue is hardened, paint is hardened, I should say. I've painted touched in a little bit of the detail with the Cosmetic Motion. Again, just use Revel acrylics to do this. I like acrylics because you can just wash it off. If it goes wrong, you can just wash it off with water. It's easy to deal with. And the other thing that I've done is I managed to fit so if I can drag the autofocus, I've managed to fit the Cosmetic Ash Pan Sides, and I've used a bit of Humbrol weathering powders on those to make it look as though it's, well, ash pans, they sort of went a bit rusty when they were used, so it's sort of like a maroony colour, if you can see. Maybe you can't see. Well, you can see under there. So that's all done. And the other thing I've just done is I've fitted the plunger pickups back into the pickup housings. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the chassis back together. Oh, sorry, there is one more thing that I've done. The motor mount, if you remember from the last video, I said that it seemed to me that it was running a bit tight. So what I've done is I've enlarged the hole slightly for the boss on the motor, and I've also enlarged the holes for the retaining screws slightly so that I can lift the motor up. The other thing that I noticed, one more thing, yet another thing, is that there was quite a bit of side play in the axles. So DJH actually give you 4 half-etched axle spacing washers, and I am going to use those. While all this has been painting, the axles, what I do with my Slater's axles, because they're steel, they're untreated steel, and they can go rusty and tarnished very easily. What I do is I use 2 zip top bags, you know, whatever you've got left over, and I put a couple of drops of, I use sewing machine oil, which I buy from Hobbycraft. A couple of drops of sewing machine oil in there, and that stops them from tarnishing. So what we'll do now is we'll get on and we will assemble the plunger pickups. I also painted the bogey and the rear bogey wheels, masking off the wiper pickups, and they've been adjusted so they make a nice contact. So what we'll do now is we'll start putting it all together, and we need various bits out of the kit, various etch bits and other bits, and I'll run through those as and when we come to them. So I've been away, I've fitted the driving wheels, and don't forget to fit the plastic gear for the motor. I forgot it, I had to take it all apart again. A tip for the pickups, you probably can't see, this one's a little bit better. Right, you see the nuts on there are not up against the housings. Make sure that they're not up against the housings, because if they are up against the housings and you've got a little bit of side play on the wheels, then what will happen is that the pickup will lose contact with the back of the wheel, and you don't want that. So they do run quite smoothly. There's no excessive resistance. And the next thing that you need to do is you need to prepare the coupling rod bushes. Now, if you remember when we tried the wheels on, you've got these little brass top hat bearings. As I'll pick one up in the tweezers, so let's bring it a little bit closer. So you've got a top hat bearing, and that fits over the 12BA screw which is in the wheel. But what you are going to do is they need to go through the coupling rod, and if you can see, there is quite a bit. It's about 1.5 millimeters overhang between where the coupling rod finishes and where the bearing finishes. So what we're going to do, we are just going to I'm going to use the Dremel, and I'm just going to reduce that height by an amount. I'll just hold it in place with my thumb. Don't file it off so much so that it becomes flush, because then it will bind when the coupling rod goes on, but it will look more prototypical. There won't be a huge gap between the washer and the coupling rod when you do that. So you need to do that for all four bearings. And I've shown you one. I won't do the other one. The other thing that you need to do is you need to get all the bits together to fix the rear bogey. So you've got a 5th axle bearing which sort of goes round the screw that you soldered into the chassis, and then you get various other bits and pieces. So there's a bit of brass tube which goes over the screw thread. There are some etch washers which are on the brass sheet. There is a spare of the washers, but there's a washer there which has got a groove etched in it, and that retains the buffer spring, which is here somewhere. Well, I'll get it in a minute and show you, but the buffer spring is quite big, and that might need reducing in height, but we can do that as and when we do it. So rather than show you loads of stuff again, I'm going to go away. I'm going to do the oh, there's the I was sitting on it. There is the spring for the bogey. It's a steel spring. It's quite high force tension. What I'm going to do is I'll go away. I've shown you how to reduce the height of one of the axle bushes. I'm going to do the other, the coupling rod bushes. I'm going to do the other three, and then we will assemble the coupling rods, and we'll put the motor in and we'll give it a little test run before we go any further. So we've fitted the coupling rod and the bushes and the nuts and bolts, and the best thing to do is just run it by hand. And it seems okay. There may be a tight spot, but we'll deal with that as and when. So the next thing we'll do is we'll fit the motor and the drive worm gear, and then we can run it using the power supply and see what happens there. So if you remember, I said that I've adjusted the motor mount so that the motor, there is a bit of movement in the motor now, so that should mean that it won't be so tight. So I'll go and do that. All it is doing up 2 small bolts and an Allen key. There's no need to do that on camera, and then I'll come back and we'll run it on the power supply and see what it's like. So we have adjusted the motor mount, got the motor the right way up. If you remember, the bottom lead, the positive lead, is soldered at an angle. We've positioned the worm and the spur gear and tightened it all up, and I'm just going to run it up using the power supply. And that is 2.1 volts and 50 milliamps. To do that, that's quite nice. So we'll run it up a little bit quicker. That's 5 volts and 60 milliamps. I'll run it up a little bit quicker. That's 9 volts and 70 milliamps. So it runs quite nice. It runs nicely. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fit the rear bogey. We're going to fit the rear bogey, and then we'll do the wiring for the pickups, and then the chassis will be complete. Then you can forget about the chassis until the body's made. So we'll go away and we'll get the bits ready to do the to mount the bogey, and then we can try it out on a little bit of track. I followed the instructions for mounting the rear bogey, and the actual assembly step is on page 1 of the instructions. It tells you what order to put them in. Make sure you get the pickups the right way. The pickups on the bogey need to be at the rear, and make sure you get it the right way up, so it's the bit with the well is on the bottom. Now what I've done is, because the body is going to be quite heavy, I have not adjusted it all the way down. So these two drivers here are slightly raised off. If you can see, if I push it down, they're slightly raised, but that is because the the body is going to be quite heavy. Otherwise you'll end up with the G5 doing wheelies. It might be rear heavy, but if we don't secure this nut, then we can adjust it later. All we want to do is we want to just see if we can get a little bit of a running chassis on a bit of a test track. So what we will do now is, if I can find them, is we will prepare the Slater's pickups, the tags, the connecting tags, and we'll secure them into position. So the oval shaped bits at the top with the two holes in are the bits that you need to use, and we'll do those. Sadly, I haven't got any of this extra flexible silicone covered wire that is in the correct DCC colours. Obviously for the pickups you need grey and orange. I'll use a bit of black again, because that is more easily concealed between the frames. So we'll just solder the pickups up with a bit of black wire first, and then we'll fit them, and then we'll see if we can get it to run just using DC. We will cover the fitting of the DCC chip when I do the body, because I haven't really got a clue yet where the DCC chip is going to be fitted. It's not a huge DCC chip, and the speaker isn't very big, but we'll cover that when we move on to the body. So I'm just going to go away. I've swarm the soldering iron up. Going to go away. I'm going to solder up the tags for the pickups, connect it all up, and then we'll see if we can get it running on DC on this short length of track. So to do the plunger pickups, you only need 4 of these tags. So I've removed 4 from the fret. Little bit of flux on the end, bit of electrical solder. Try and keep the electrical solder down one end, and then for the wires to join the pickups up, I've got sort of like, I've measured off between the front and the intermediate driving wheel, the front and the rear driving wheel. I've measured off and allowed a little bit extra for the pickups to move, and then soldered a bit on the end. This one I've not done yet, so I've tinned this end. This end I've not tinned, I've just twisted the bits together, and I've just soldered these up. So just tin the wire. Doesn't have to go all the way because you're going to cut the end off. So I cut the end off, and then what we'll do here is we'll separate these into the individual ones. Don't need to worry too much about removing the etching tags because they won't interfere with anything. So I've got 4 now, and what I'll do is I'll do one so you can see. So we'll start off with the intermediate one first. Just lie the tag down, lay your tin wire on the top, offer the soldering iron up to the tag. Try and keep it neat. And there it is. There's the first one done. And we'll do the last one. Let's put a little bit more solder on that. more solder. And there are the wires. That's the first one for your pickups. Trim it off. And repeat for the second one, and then we'll go and fit them. Right, so I've fitted the Slater's Plunger Pickups and the tags, if you can see there, and in the middle, and it's a bit of a jewellery rig at the moment. I've just connected, there are 6 wires, 3 on either side, 2 for the bogey, 2 for the front driver pickups and 2 for the motor. And what I'll just do, I've just got a little bit of track here. I've collected the bench power supply up to this, and there you go. So I can't reverse it. I've got to build a reversing attachment for it, but so it moves off at 2.1 volts and it's about 100 milliamps. So that looks very promising for the DCC side of it. And it does move quite nicely. There's no binding or anything because we've been careful. Fitting the plunger pickups, the Slater's plunger pickups, is one of the more fiddly jobs that you will probably encounter in your modelling. It is probably the one reason why a lot of people don't use Slater's pickups. But if you take your time and you work in an environment where if something does ping off somewhere you can find it, then it shouldn't be too difficult. A good pair of tweezers is pretty essential for that task. So yes, it is a bit fiddly to do, but I'm quite pleased with that. I can't run it very quickly because it's only one length of track, and it will work better with a bit of weight on it. It's a bit light footed at the moment, but it's going to have a huge, very heavy body fitted on it, and that will give it plenty of adhesion. So thank you for watching for this part, and that is the chassis completed. If you've taken your time, you'll have a nice smooth running chassis which will make the completed locomotive that much more satisfying. Thank you for watching, and see you again soon, and we'll start building the body.